Welcome to Casual Politics, Angus Robertson. Thank you very much for accepting my request, and I'm very grateful to you.
It's great to be on Casual Politics.
Thank you very much. You're the second SNP MP of this Alexander for accepting my request, and I'm very grateful to you. First, please allow me to congratulate you on your re-election as Member of Parliament. And I wondered how exciting was it for you to come back to Parliament and see your party as the third largest party in Parliament?
It's transformational. You could hardly have expected to be in that environment. You could hardly imagine it. I've been in Parliament now for 14 years. I was elected in 2001. And there have only ever been, whilst I've been here, 5 or 6 of us. So you got used to being quite a small but nimble group of SNP parliamentarians, and obviously there are limits to what you can do individually. And collectively, with only 5 or 6 members, you suddenly find yourself in a situation of 56 MPs, 56 out of 59 in Scotland. So that's transformational in a Scottish political level, and it's transformational at a UK political level because you're going from being this 1% of Parliament, because there's 659 MPs, we had only 6, and we're now the size that we are. We're the third biggest party, and that brings with it all kinds of opportunities and responsibilities, and that has led to a massive change in terms of how we operate at Westminster, how we're able to operate, and I think it's for the best, well, definitely for the best of our constituents, for the SNP, and it's having, I think, a positive impact on this place. Not that I can be persuaded that we can reform it to the extent that we'd be happy to continue to be governed from here forever.
But what's your responsibility as the third largest party in Parliament?
There are a whole series of ways in which decisions are made and matters are debated, whether in the chamber of the House of Commons or in the committees of the House of Commons, where there is a guaranteed role for the third party. So a Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister has 6 questions from the leader of the Labour Party every week, and has 2 questions now from the Westminster leader of the SNP, which is me. So we are able to put our point of view about things that really matter to us, whether they're about Scottish issues or international issues. And if you have a look at the different matters that I've raised in Prime Minister's questions,
it was over genocide
in Bosnia, and they're brought up the issue of refugees in the Mediterranean. So there are a whole series of issues where we have points that we want to make that we're now able to make. So that's Prime Minister's question. On top of me, I'm having colleagues who are called to raise questions as well, which would have been absolutely unheard of. Today we had defence questions. I'm told there are 9 different SNP parliamentarians who were able to get in. By rough rule of thumb, when we were in the last Parliament, we'd be lucky if we got 1 person in to raise questions. So by being so numerous, by being so present, I think most people have been struck by the fact that when they now look at the chamber of the House of Commons, you have some Conservatives attending, you have some Labour MPs attending, and you have lots of SNP MPs there. So we're very noticeable. On committees, we're now on literally every single committee in the House of Commons, and so there are a whole series of policy areas that UK political parties would be unlikely historically to take up, where by our presence, bringing a refreshing progressive voice into those committees, we can influence how those committees work, just as we'll influence the tone and content of the debate in the chamber of the House of Commons, and I think that's a thoroughly good thing.
But that's very good, but because you got 56 MPs in the House of Commons, and actually you haven't got any members in the House of Lords. What is that?
It's called principle. I know it's a rare thing in politics.
Even in UK, they got a peer sitting in the Lords.
Yeah, indeed. Like I said, principle. Our principal position is that we will not take seats in an unelected Parliament. Now, we live in the 21st century. Parliaments and democracies are elected directly or indirectly. And the UK has decided to maintain a medieval form of governance, where one of the chambers in the national Parliament is not made up by people who actually have a mandate, as in people voted for them. They are there because they are friends who happen to be the leaders of the Conservative Party, or the Labour Party, or the Liberal Democrats, decided that they should be members. It's very intriguing to actually look at how many of them have been donors to those 3 parties, because there's a very, very high incidence.
You're referring to Michael Ashcroft.
I'm referring to much more than Michael Ashcroft. If one looks at membership of the House of Lords, and one asks oneself how many of them have been significant financial donors to the UK political parties. A great many of them have been. I don't think that's any way to run a parliament. I think we should all be elected with a mandate, and that is a democratic mandate that is selected by the people in a direct or indirect election.
And let's go to the general election. It was a shock to see your party to come back to Parliament with 56 members of Parliament. To what extent do you think that the Tory strategy, which was that Labour Party will form a coalition with your party and they will bankrupt and break up the United Kingdom, did it cut through the wider electorate?
Well, I think in Scotland, the notion that the SNP could hold the balance of power, that we could be a significant player, that we could have a positive influence, that we would, in rejecting the austerity agenda of the three UK political parties, that we would reflect a distinct and important voice. That was certainly of benefit to the SNP. The danger that we've always had in previous elections is by the time you get closer to polling day, people suggest that you're not going to be able to influence the outcome, become a significant player in the Parliament, and be able to represent the interests of your constituents with the full force of a significant presence in the House of Commons. Well, that proved to be totally incorrect, and the closer we got to polling day, the screechier the Tories became, the more excited the centre-right media became about the SNP having a role to play. And for voters in Scotland who like the SNP, which is why we have the only majority government in the UK, it's something that the Conservative Party don't. And when the polls closed and the votes were counted, they only achieved 37%. The SNP achieved 50%. And so people like us. And what's quite nice is a lot of the feedback that I've been getting from people in England, and I got an email, a lovely email from a couple in Dorset last week saying how much they like the SNP, how much they like the issues that we raise, how they wish that the SNP would stand in their part of the world. And for the first time, perhaps, people in the rest of the UK are hearing and seeing what we're about, and that's a good thing.
Well, are you conscious that they like your party, but what they're not in favour of another independence, in actually to separate yourself from the United Kingdom?
Yeah. Well, firstly, we're not in favour of separating ourselves from anything. We live on the island of Britain. We're quite happily living on the island of Britain as part of Europe. I'm just, the language is very important of these things. We're in favour of Scotland being an independent country, so that's about where we make decisions. We think we should be able to do that in the Scottish Parliament, but of course we'd remain living on these islands, one of the home nations. Our closest neighbours and friends will remain our friends in England and Wales and Ireland, north and south. This election was about who can best represent your constituency, who can best represent Scotland's interests, who will raise the issues that matter not just in Scotland but elsewhere when it comes to austerity, or whether it comes to renewing the Trident nuclear weapon system. And it proved extremely effective. So the election was about who should be your MP, which party is best able to do that. We were not seeking a mandate for another independence referendum. We had one last year, we didn't win. We were very sad. We were 45%, which is a lot of the public in Scotland, but we're not the majority. And so we are Democrats, so we respect the majority opinion in Scotland. Of course, we're Democrats, so if people want to have an independence referendum in the future, they should be able to have that, surely. I remain in favour of independence. I believe independence will come. Why? Because normal people make decisions for themselves. As soon as you grow up and you leave the family home, you're responsible. And I think whether we are as individuals or collectively as nations, I think we should be able to make the decisions that really matter for us. We should be imaginative in this interdependent world as to how we continue the close relationships that are so important for us, not just on these islands, but across Europe. I'm a very strong pro-European. It will come again, but not now. Now we're trying to make sure that the devolution, the autonomy that we were promised just before the referendum took place by the three UK parties, that's actually delivered. We're making further proposals above and beyond that would strengthen Scotland's autonomy. We're pushing for that at the moment. I wouldn't say I'm 100% confident of getting everything through that we're wanting to get through, and I don't think the UK government is living up to the promises that they made, but our job is to hold them to account, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
You say that the question of independence will come again, but not now. But Nicola Sturgeon, she said that she is in favour of setting a timetable for another independence, and you disagree with her. Is that correct?
No, Nicola Sturgeon has not said that there should be a timetable for an independence referendum. The issue of when people in Scotland will have the democratic choice on independence or anything else is going to be a matter for them. And they'll decide when they want to have that. Politicians, if they're good, understand where the electorate's at, so we'll know when people want to hold another referendum. We held a number of referenda on devolution. We had one in 1979, and then we had another one in 1997. It's normal that one has referenda in a democracy. It's normal that one has an election, and then another election in a democracy. That's how we make decisions. We're not going to make another decision on independence now. Why? Because we've just done that. On the 18th of September 2014, we had a vote on that. And we've been concentrating our minds on the parliamentary process, trying to make sure that the Scotland Bill, which is a legislation that the UK government has brought forward to deliver on the vow, as it was called in 2014, is delivered. The powers of more powers to the Parliament, so we can live in a more socially just Scotland, a more economically successful Scotland, and our democracy being secure. That's what was promised. Other words were used. Home rule was used. As near as to federalism as possible we used. These are the promises that were being made. And what happened after the referendum? Well, the next day the Prime Minister said that the most important thing for him was English votes for English laws. Well, that tells you a lot about the Westminster bubble and how out of touch the Conservative Party and others are at Westminster. We are not going away. We are 56. And we represent 50% of the electorate, which is not everybody in Scottish politics, but there are a great many people who voted for the other political parties who also want more powers for Scotland's democracy, and we will make sure that that's delivered.
English MPs on English matters. The principle of it's right, actually. It's about fairness and justice. You can't, because English, you got your own parliament and you vote on the issues affecting Scottish people, and you're not allowed to vote on issues affecting English people. So why didn't you disagree with the Conservatives? And because the leader of the House of Commons, he put it off the issue until the House comes back in September. Why is that?
Well, the reason why is because it's not actually as simple a proposition as it sounds, and the reason why is as follows. There are many issues that are presented as being English only, but they have a significant direct or indirect financial effect, because the way that the UK finances are run is that you get a dispensation from the UK government to English departments delivering on English public services, and Scotland then, through a thing called the Barnett Formula, gets an increase in its budget to cover those things. Now, if something is proposed in England that has an impact on Scotland's public services, that is really important to people in Scotland. So it's not as simple as saying, this is a proposal that only impacts on people in England. It doesn't. And that's why we've been pointing out that the government's proposals have been flawed. We've taken great efforts in the past to ensure that wherever possible, if something is purely of English effect, that it should be English parliamentarians. That's been the SNP position. We understand why many people in England are unhappy about present circumstances. That's why when we're in favour of Scottish independence, we're by extension also in favour of English independence. We think the people of England will be very good at running their own country. So I have every confidence that that will work just fine. The difficulty is that the way the UK is structured and organised doesn't reflect the changes that are taking place in the constitutional order of the UK. So some things are really out of sync, and so while I understand emotionally many people in England have been upset with policies being foisted on them that they didn't vote for, imagine how we feel. We've just gone through votes on the Scotland Bill in the House of Commons that wouldn't impact on England at all, where 58 out of 59 Scottish MPs voted for it, and what happened? The Tories arrived and voted the other way and defeated us. So there are many shortcomings in the UK constitutional setup.
For instance, on tuition fees, your MPs, they voted again, in favour of tuition fees, which affected English students and not Scottish students. Is that fair, in your opinion?
Yeah. No, we're against tuition fees. We're in favour of free education, and that's why the Scottish Government has worked very hard to protect free education. We were against the introduction of tuition fees in England. Why? Because it's exactly one of those issues. It's about the impact that it could have indirectly on Scottish education. And that's why we've been trying to point out the shortcomings of the way that things are organised, and I'm sure that there'll be a prize that will go to somebody if they can work out a solution for it, because I think there should be English votes for English laws. However, one has to understand that that can only be the case if we satisfactorily sort out the examples of the financial arrangements where decisions about these matters do have an impact on people in Scotland, on the budget in Scotland, and what that means for our public services, our NHS, our education system, and so on. And that's where the Conservative Party has been woolly in its thinking in working out, well, how do they actually sort that out? One could have a federal solution if one was prepared to go down. Plenty of countries in the world have done that. But I know of no example in the world of where there's a federation where 85% of the population live in one part. And that's the situation that would pertain in the UK. So we have our preferred outcome, we have our preferred solution, we know it works. Why do we know it works? Well, that's because pretty much every country in the world is independent. And if it's good enough for everybody else, we think it's good enough for ourselves as well.
And how will you protect Scotland to not be affected by George Osborne's budget, which he announced last week?
Well, unlike the Labour Party, unlike the Labour Party, we're actually going to vote against the things that we disagree with. I have no idea what is going on in the Labour Party at the present time. They call themselves the official opposition, but they have abstained on so many things here that really did matter to their constituents and to people who voted for them. No, we have opposed the austerity agenda of the Conservatives, both in the last Parliament, when we remember it was the Liberal Democrats who were helping the Tories do all that, and perhaps goes some way to explaining why the Liberal Democrats did so badly in the elections. But we are going to remain steadfastly consistent in this Parliament in rejecting the austerity agenda of the... It cannot be right that the government is literally taking from the poor to give to the rich. That can't be right, surely not. And
what lessons has SNP to learn from the Greek crisis as they want to get their independence and to be left with billions of debt as Greece is?
Well, there's a lesson to everybody in politics. That your decisions matter not just for the term of office that you're in, but for the generations that follow you. And that's equally applicable in Greece as it is in countries like Germany. There are long-term consequences of these big and challenging issues, and my heart goes out to people in Greece because it's appalling the circumstances in which people are having to literally survive and put food on the table. And I wish European decision makers that are involved in this process every success, because it's only by an agreed solution that hopefully Greece is able to grow economically out of the problems that it has, whilst at the same time recognising that hard-working people and elsewhere in Europe shouldn't have to pay forever for the mistakes of governments that are long past in Greece. They're out of office. So there's no easy way in this. Anybody who suggests there's an easy outcome is misleading, which is why, to answer your question, what can we learn directly, I think in the first instance is be mindful of the fact that the decisions you make have long-term consequences.
And if Britain decide to leave the European Union, would it produce a claim over another independence?
Referendum in Scotland? Yes.
Why?
Because I have no doubt that Scotland would vote to remain within the European Union. We're a European country. So if we were to be taken out of the EU against our will, that would be a material change in our circumstances since the independence referendum. I have no doubt that people would be wishing to decide whether we are going to be taken out of the European Union against our will or not. We want to remain within the EU.
Are you conscious of the consequences if you leave the United Kingdom?
If we become an independent country, it means we always get the government that we elect. I tend to think that's quite a good thing.
And what are the powers that you want to see involved to Scotland?
Well, I just want all powers that are currently exercised by the UK Parliament
full control over income tax.
Full control over everything. This is a beautiful building, but I don't see why.
Isn't that utopic in your opinion?
Goodness me! When I would urge you to interview somebody from Denmark or somebody from Norway or somebody from Sweden. You wouldn't be asking them this question. There is no difference between us and them, in as much as they are countries of 5 million people, many of them with larger neighbours who for a long time said that you'll never be able to be an independent country. They're now amongst the wealthiest, fairest societies in the world, and I would happily follow their example. You might describe it as a utopian situation to be in. I would say, au contraire, they're showing how you can make better decisions as a smaller country. Of course, there's not a money tree, there's not a guarantee of inevitable success. I just think on the balance of probabilities, are you able to make better decisions closer to home about the things that you can really affect? Of course.
And one of the highlights of George Osborne's budget was that the government will ring-fence its defence budget. Why do you think are they wrong on this issue?
Well, firstly, you've got to be careful not to be taken in by all of the hype. The UK is cooking the books when it comes to defence spending. They're taking a whole lot of things that previously weren't in the defence budget, and they're now putting it in the defence budget to prove that they're spending $2 billion. So what was previously a separate intelligence budget line is now part of the MOD budget. What was previously separate as MOD pensions is now within the defence budget. What was previously in the conflict resolution pool of the Foreign Office is now within the defence budget. And then of course you've got this massive wedge of spending on something that the MOD and the UK can never use, which is nuclear weapons. We can never ever use nuclear weapons. It would be a crime of unimaginable proportions to kill millions of people indiscriminately. So I'm in favour of meaningful, important conventional defence spending. So a maritime nation like Scotland or a maritime state like the UK, you'd imagine they'd have maritime patrol aircraft. No, they don't. They don't have a single one. It's not serious. The priorities are all wrong. So I think one needs to take conventional defence seriously. I think in many respects the UK doesn't do that properly. We're a northern European nation, but the UK doesn't take the high northern Arctic seriously. It's our backyard. We don't take part in the NATO maritime patrols off the North Atlantic. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. So there does need to be a change in thinking. We will keep on banging on that drum, but let's not pretend that the UK is doing anything other than cooking the books at the present time when it comes to MOD spending, and they're spending far too much of it on something that they can never use.
But the world has become a dangerous place to live in. For instance, the Russian threat is still there. And is it wise to get rid of Trident?
Yes.
Why?
Well, I mean, if it's important for us to have nuclear weapons, you're then following the logic of Kim Jong-un. And we should all follow North Korea's lead, shouldn't we? Surely the Italians need nuclear weapons. Surely then the Spaniards need nuclear weapons. Surely then the Poles need nuclear weapons. No, that's not the case. We live in a world where we're trying to reduce reliance and spending on nuclear weapons. We thought it was a tremendously good thing when President Nelson Mandela announced that he was going to end South Africa's nuclear weapons program. We thought that was a tremendously good thing. Well, if it's good for South Africa, why is it not good for us? The consequences of following the logic of we require to have nuclear weapons to be safe then is everybody else needs it. And I don't think that's true.
And if there's another vote over Syria, will you vote against it, your party?
Against what?
Intervention in Syria.
What kind of intervention?
Military intervention.
See, I've asked a couple of questions,
oh, yes.
and they're quite important.
Yes.
Because the difficulty is when you start and you're asked for a blank check, who knows where you're going to end up. Now, we have tradition in the UK of being told that we're just doing this. So we're just going to Afghanistan to deal with Al-Qaeda. And then we're there for longer than we are in the Second World War, trying to build a state. So we're there on false pretenses. We get involved in an illegal war in Iraq. The consequences of it we're still paying for, including terrorist organizations like Daesh being able to operate through large parts of the west of that country and in Syria. The plight of the people of Syria is horrific. And if there were any easy ways to sort out the situation in Syria, I'm sure somebody would have come out with it. I'm just mindful of the fact that a couple of years ago it was being suggested that we should be funding and arming all kinds of groups. Really? And were we confident where the weapons would end up and who they'd be used against? I don't think so. And that's why we opposed the blank check approach that was being suggested at that time. We remain very sceptical about being able to achieve military objectives just by bombing from 30,000 feet. The truth of these scenarios is if one really thinks that military intervention is a good thing, you have to have boots on the ground. Don't see David Cameron clamouring to spend tens of thousands of young men and women from the UK to fight in the deserts of Syria. So I think we need to think through how we can help the people of Syria, what can we do to counter extremism abroad and at home, and we need a joined up approach, and we're all in this together. It's in everybody's interest that we get stability in Syria, an end to conflict, that we can promote and support peace, reconciliation, the growth of democracy, but we're not going to do that by dropping bombs from 30,000 feet.
But how could we combat an ideology if it's not by military intervention?
The most important issue that we are having to confront is an idea. It's an idea. And you cannot end an idea by bombing it, and you cannot counter intolerance and narrow-mindedness and vengeance and violence, the death cult which is Daesh. You cannot do that purely by bombing from the air. We need to do everything that we can to get the countries of the region to take the challenges seriously. We need to support those groups that we know are going to be capable and stable, and we need to support the Kurds, for example, in doing just that. But anybody suggesting there is an easy answer to this conundrum is misleading. But we need to be open to all genuine attempts to try and find a peaceful solution to conflicts such as those in Syria, and understand where there are irreconcilable differences with which we will not be able to compromise, and there are terrorist groups like that in that part of the world, and it is by taking a mixed approach that we have the best chance of success.
So what's the alternative then?
Well, it's just like I'm suggesting. One of the first things we need to do is support those in the region who are doing everything to counter the extremists on the ground, so the likes of the Kurds. We need to support them. We also need to support those countries that are dealing with the humanitarian consequences. And if you look at what both Jordan and Lebanon in particular have had to take on as a burden in terms of refugees, we need to do everything to help them. We need to support a regional approach to trying to move things onto a more secure footing. And we need to be aware that there is radicalisation at home as well as abroad, and that's why we need to work with all of our communities to ensure that everybody feels that they have a future, and a future that is based on respect, on law, and does not foster extremism in any way. These are the range of things that we all need to play a part in.
And my last question, what are the challenges that the Conservative government will face over the next 5 years? And will you help them to overcome those challenges?
There are a whole range of issues where Democrats have a shared agenda to work together, and as Democrats we will work in the UK Parliament to play our role as a responsible opposition. We will do that, of course we will. But I think what we will see over the next 5 years is a UK government that has only one seat in Scotland, imposing its will on the people of Scotland, and a very unpopular and painful policy approach of austerity, which is avoidable, and I think that will have medium and long-term consequences both for the governance of Scotland and for the UK, which will end up with Scotland deciding that it wants to make better decisions for itself, which will involve making more decisions closer to home. That's what normal countries do. It'll happen in Scotland, and we will move into a new chapter of our relations between the neighbours and friends that make up these islands, and they'll be to the advantage of us all.
We shall wait and see. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the conversation.
Thank you.